Welcome everybody to the KMint presentation, 7th webinar. I'm very excited today to bring you a topic that has been a perennial topic for myself and my co-presenter, Stephen Von Muenster. We actually presented getting your agency ready for exit about 3 years ago on a national roadshow. So we thought it was time, and I've invited a couple of great industry experts to share this topic with us today. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kathryn Williams, the founder and owner of KMint, pricing and financial consultancy. I work with all agencies, no matter the genre. So that could be advertising, PR, design, digital media, web, experiential, around the globe, thanks to COVID. So I can be present wherever you are at whatever time zone. Now, I work with agencies of all different sizes to help the business owners and their second in charge and to mentor their juniors to understand the commercial side of running the business. And I do this through my retainer consultancy business with ad hoc consultancy, my how-to booklets, Show Me the Money mentor program, keynotes and webinars like today. Now, this year, this is the 7th of the series of webinars, and we've got a couple more to come. The topic is really important. It's about the financial side and the legal side and the emotional side of gearing your agency for exit, whether you're the owner wanting to pass the baton, a succession plan to your second in charge, or whether you're exiting completely and selling it or merging it with another. So today, I'd like to introduce my co-presenter today, Stephen Von Muenster. Stephen is the principal solicitor at Von Muenster Legal. And yes, as we presented 3 years ago, it was time for us to get together again. Stephen sits on a number of boards around Australia, industry bodies, ACA, PR Council, IMAA, and has recently doing some pretty big deals, but done a lot of merge and acquisition deals, including some that we would know, Mercer Bell, Highland Media, Heard Agency, and Umbrella. So I'll pass to Stephen to do a little intro, and then we'll come and we'll meet Gavin Bain. So Gavin and I worked together about 3 years ago, CEO of Meerkats. After a decade, he actually merged his agency in with Wunderman Thompson. So Gavin's joining us today kindly to share his experiences, tips and tricks. And I've also invited a recent friend of mine, so Rick McEvoy, 7 years with Elmwood Design here in Melbourne with his partner, Kate Richardson. And this year, they actually bought out from the Global Design Group, from headquarters in Britain. They bought the Melbourne business. So Rick is also joining us, and I'll pass to Rick a little later to introduce him and share some of his tips and tricks as we go through the session. So without further ado, let me pass across to Stephen. Stephen, tell us a little bit more about your involvement with agencies.
Well, thank you, Kathryn, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking the time to listen to all of us speak today about this important topic of passing the baton, as Kathryn has said. I've had the privilege of working with and serving effectively the advertising, communications and media sectors for some 25 years. I'm a partner at Von Muenster Legal, as Kathryn has mentioned, and we're a small specialist boutique agency based in Surrey Hills. We work with individuals, SMEs, right through to public companies, both in Australia and overseas, predominantly in these sectors. In addition to commercial matters, intellectual property matters, I have a very strong interest and practice extensively in mergers and acquisitions, as mentioned by Kathryn. And on the other side of the ledger, I also work extensively in dispute resolution and solutions. And I was the lawyer who ran the Icon Communications test case in 2018. And most recently, the EdCom authority case at the end of last year. So I tend to bookend my practice with the happy side and the unhappy side and see everything in between. As also mentioned by Kathryn, I'm a legal advisor to the Advertising Council, the Media Federation of Australia, the Independent Media Association of Australia, the newly formed industry body, and I also sit on the board of the AIMCO influencer marketing body, which was established last year. I also do a little bit of work and assist the Shopper Marketing Industry Association called SHOP. I enjoy engaging with these industry bodies as it keeps me up to date with what everybody is doing and allows me to remain relevant to my clients. I hope to share some insights with you today, along with Gavin, Rick and Kathryn, and answer any questions that you may have if you decide to pass the baton yourself or in fact receive the baton. And if I can at the end of this session, or indeed afterwards if I might be able to do so. So thank you for allowing me to introduce myself, Kathryn.
Fantastic. And what you'll find out a little later about Stephen, when I raise the question for you all, if you are exiting, what are you going to do next? Well, you might follow Stephen's lead. He's got a little cattle farm somewhere, I believe. So we might share some out of school curricular activities.
Yes, indeed.
So I'd love to introduce you now to Gavin Bain, a long-term friend of mine, past client and industry guru. Gavin also sits on the board with the Advertising Council of Australia. Gavin, welcome. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experiences over the last couple of years, from when you at Martin and Mel decided we're going to do something with this awesome agency.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation too, Kathryn. Really appreciate it. Meerkats was around for 16 years and I was the CEO for 10 years. Interestingly, one of the goals that was given to me by the founders when I first joined was to help them exit when the time was right. So that was kind of set right from the very beginning of the relationship. We'd all worked together in another agency and they brought me in once the agency got to a certain size. We built a really strong strategic business here in Perth and became the largest independent agency in WA. The two original founders then, as part of a sabbatical agreement, both went away from sabbaticals when they hit 10 years and effectively they never really came back. So they enjoyed their sabbatical so much that I went about looking for a couple of new business partners to replicate their roles. And those two individuals came into the business and the three of us reshaped the Meerkats offer and started thinking about what the future looked like strategically and from a structural perspective. And we started building IP into the business, thinking very carefully about how we were positioning the business in the market. And that was actually when I started engaging with Kathryn, and Kathryn was very helpful in helping us look at both the IP delivery, but the way that we were thinking about our pricing and pricing strategies. The conversation then became really about growth and the opportunity for growth in the West Australian market. Coupled with that, we had the two founders who were increasingly keen to move away from the business. So we had the founders exit on one side of the coin, and we had the desire of the business to keep growing. So we really worked jointly with the founders to look at, and we really took, it was a 2-year preparation period before we started looking at exactly what we were going to do from a merge perspective. And we actually looked at a number of opportunities, but we looked at management buyout and really thoroughly assessed how that might work as an option. My dog's going to bark now. It's going to be hilarious. Welcome to... we're not locked down over here, but we're still at home a lot.
That's a cheers for you.
Thanks very much. We also looked at individual investors, and we actually connected with a number of individual investors looking to help the founders to exit the business. But really, the strategic outcome that we were looking for was we had a really strong IP and strategic idea in Meerkats. And we were locked in a small geography. So we were looking for an opportunity to take our IP and our thinking to a broader audience. And that's when I approached Wunderman Thompson, who had a small operation in Perth, which was a satellite business of the Sydney office, and started the conversation about merge. And, we're lucky enough that the strategic planets aligned at that point, and that everything everything pointed to that being the right decision. So, I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions where I can add some more value along the way, but that's my backstory.
Fantastic. Really nice to set the scene. And for many of you listening, listen out for the time it takes, the preparation and the conversation and the deal. So this is a theme that will run through today. So Rick, I'd love to welcome you. Thank you very much for coming today to share your journey with us. Would you like to give us a little backstory and lead us up to where you are today?
It's great to be here. Thanks again, Kathryn, for inviting me. As you mentioned, I'm the co-managing partner of Elmwood Australia, and really excited to be here with my fellow panelists to share with you some of the recent experience that we've been through and very, very recent with an MBO as part of a bigger global network, the Elmwood network. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to share it from a buyer's perspective rather than a seller's perspective, so we can get kind of both sensibilities to that. For those that might not be aware, Elmwood is a global network of studios. We've been around for more than 45 years now, and we truly stretch the globe from New York City to London to Asia to Australia and everything that goes with that. That time in that 40 years, we've grown prolifically across the globe. And we now claim as the world's most effective design consultancy as part of that. You mentioned before, Kathryn, about the time this takes. I think Kate Richardson and myself came into our leadership position within Elmwood in around 2018. I think it was probably at that point in time we set a new direction for the Elmwood Australia business. And with that, we've seen tremendous growth and success that's come from that. I think at the same point in time, being part of a global network, we became really blissfully aware that we probably didn't have the attention and local focus that we were really expecting and wanted as part of that. So it probably went all the way back to 2018 in terms of some of those conversations about us having a voice, us having a seat at the table for some of those things that we could be more locally relevant. And those sort of conversations with Jonathan, the majority shareholder, kind of started like a long time ago about having that voice at the table. COVID struck, and basically the globe went into a really different situation. So in 2020, the Elmwood global business went through a demerger, which you might have seen in some press back in 2020. And at probably that point in time, we worked really closely with the majority shareholder and the actual group associated with it to go through a management buyout. I think what was really interesting in our case is that Jonathan Sands, majority shareholder, had been through something very, very similar in 1989 when he acquired the Elmwood business in really similar situation and circumstances with a management buyout. So he was really driven to continue that legacy that was Elmwood as part of that next generation of leadership. So when you came to me and spoke about passing the baton, I thought it was really appropriate. We've been through something very, very similar in the same regard.
Fantastic. Well, I've got the right people here today. So thank you, everybody. Now, I'm going to move across to our slide deck. And we are going to today cover the process, as I mentioned before. It's really important that you look at this as a step-by-step process at wherever you may be on the journey here, because I know a lot of you are actually attending today. I know you personally, and just from being in the industry for 30 odd years, when I started back at Clem's 34 years ago. So wherever you are in the process, look at the timings of what you need to do. The entry and exit options, so we'll cover those today as well. The preparation that you must do from a legal standpoint and financially particularly. There's nothing much I don't know about the finances of an agency, having been in this space for so many years. The negotiation, or the dance, as Stephen likes to call it, which I quite like. And we're going to wrap up with tips and traps from everybody on the panel here today and some Q&A time as well. So without further ado, let's have a look at setting the scene here. I guess you never really know. An approach could come to you unsolicited, or you might be starting to prepare yourself, and you've got a really strategic approach here, as we heard from Gavin. You know, they did a lot of research before they embarked upon this journey. So from the, what type of sale it is it an equity sale where you sell everything, or an asset sale, which is where you just sell the assets, which is more common in our space. If you're doing a sale, consider where you're based in across the jurisdiction of Australia. Queensland have stamp duty, GST could apply as well, capital gains tax rather. So you need to be prepared and understand all the details. The negotiation as well. So doing the deal, lasting the distance, it can be quite grueling. And always have your answer to the question, why are you buying or why are you selling? That's really important. And it's often one of the first questions I ask. And you'd be surprised how many actually don't have an answer for what's coming up next. So I might pass to Stephen and just ask you, Stephen, do you have anything to add on this slide about the options around MBO, merge, IPO?
Sure. Well, look, just again, this slide is introducing some of the topics we'll pick up a bit more detail later on. But I suppose from the options, the exit entry options point of view, it's important to understand, of course, there's no template answer to what is right for you in terms of how you will do this. It's what is best for you, and that's on taking good advice as well, or undertaking your own research. And it also depends on what you're looking for. And, you know, do you want to get out? Do you want to go and buy a farm in Cornwall, grow turnips and make gin from it, which is what one of my clients wanted to do? Or do you want to become the next global CEO of the global company that bought your agency, or what have you? So it really does come down to that. And the list there of the ways in which this can happen. Of course, we got Rick with his MBO. Succession is just a slower MBO, really. It's where it's a gradual succession over time from the founders to perhaps the two ICs. And we see that with a new company sometimes. The classic merger where you have two strong agencies, which I'm dealing with one right now, forming a new JV company up the top, and that'll become the vehicle going forward. So we have a true merger. Then we have the acquisition, and Gavin spoke about that. We have IPOs, and would you be familiar in the old days with STW, WPP, perhaps AJF partnership that went into Tritantium, or however, if I can pronounce it correctly, in advance of an IPO. Sometimes you see that, equity and asset sales. So look, they're the ways that we can do it. In terms of the preparation, in advance of a knock on the door, or in fact your own active solicitation, which happens as well. Sometimes parties just come together, and parties come together sometimes because they're introduced by matchmakers. All of these are valid ways these occur. You just need to be prepared with your legal documents, need to be in order. We'll speak about that in more detail. Kathryn will speak about having your financial documents in order. The synergy needs to be there, the chemistry needs to be there. Otherwise, the earn-out and the merger won't work. I probably don't need to say that, and a lot of the things I do talk about aren't necessarily legal strictly, but just from my experience. And then the resilience of the parties to go the distance and be ready for the journey from the beginning to the signing of the document completion, but then the tail out and the earn out and the end game, which sometimes happens 3 or 4 years down the track. In terms of the negotiation, just a quick point I'd like to make there, an offer will come through one way or another, and you'll get a term sheet, a letter of intent, a transaction summary, or a heads of agreement. They're the same thing. It's a big muscle moves document about what the deal is going to look like. There'll then be a due diligence process, which we'll talk about in more detail. You'll be then negotiating what we call transaction documents. There's usually 3 or 4 of those. Again, we'll talk about them in more detail. And it can take some time, as Kathryn mentioned, internally and externally. This takes time, but as I will be reinforcing as I go along today, you need to get on with it. And there's a number of blockages that can occur, but we don't want to lose the deal. And I'll share some stories with you later on. Think about whether or not an earn-out cap is something that is reasonable. I don't like, when I act for the acquired or the target agency, I don't like earn-out caps if you can avoid them, because everyone should share in the upside of an outstanding earn-out. One of the most important things that I've seen in this last 2 years of COVID is how it can impact an earn-out, and having protections or force majeure protections against left of field situations like COVID that can very much hit an earn-out really needs to be front of mind at the moment. And the big takeout for me at this point in the negotiation is be happy with the upfront. If you're happy with the money you get upfront, and the rest is cream on the top, you're well insulated against contingencies that might happen in the future. And I'll talk more about that. Thank you, Kathryn.
Fantastic. I noticed there also the walk away, and we'll cover that as well. Sometimes, you just feel it in your gut. It's time to walk away. Let's move to the next slide. So leave or stay. I guess, there's a couple of different ways, as you're already hearing from Gavin and from Rick, and I've also been involved in a number of acquisitions over the years. Some have gone really well and others have not gone as well. Being sure that you're actually representing yourself, or you've got the right people on your team to help you, because it can be grueling. I wondered if I could pass to our 2 guests. So Gavin, as you walked through the process, I mean, you're fortunate that you have Martin and Mel with you by your side, so the 3 of you to, I guess, collaborate and bounce ideas off. Was that useful to you as you were negotiating through with Wunderman Thompson?
Yeah, I think one of the important points on this particular piece is, I think when you're running a business, you should always be thinking about leaving or staying. I think preparing it, you're running a business and an offer can come at any time. So making sure that you've got your focus on the health of the business and the way that you're representing that business at all times, regardless of whether you're thinking of selling or not, I think is a really good way to think about the health of the business. Because at the point, if something does come up and an offer is made, you need to be ready to go at that point. Sometimes it comes from the side, sometimes it's a preparation point, but to always be thinking about, if someone was to walk into our business today and to look at our financials and to look at the health of the business, does it tell a good story? I think is a really good way to think about it and always be prepared. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I think that having aligned partners is critical to it. And when you start going through a conversation about potentially moving the business on or changing, and when money is involved, it can be quite an emotional conversation. So professionals can become unprofessional if you're not handled well. So having very transparent conversations about what everyone's trying to achieve very early will make sure that the process is smoother further down the track, because it does get very complicated.
It's a really good point you make, and ducks in a row keeps coming up as a tagline for me. You need to be really clear on your position with the agency and your figures and understand it. Now, interesting, from the other side of the coin, we've got Rick, who was in the business as senior management running the Melbourne Australian branch. So you had access to the figures, so you were fairly transparent. That was useful for you also, wasn't it, in having these leave or stay, how's it going to walk through, wasn't it, Rick?
Yeah, absolutely, Kathryn. I mean, we've got a really strong fiscal focus to our business and have done for an awfully long period of time. And it's always been something that's been top of mind, having those numbers and ducks in a row. But to probably echo your points, having Kate in my corner the whole duration has just been so invaluable. The idea of, I think in the previous screen where we spoke about negotiations, about we were negotiating across the oceans, right? So it's like so many of those things can be misinterpreted through email and things, and to have a sounding board and to be able to bounce off another individual that you just respect and value so much, it was just such an integral part of having done the deal.
Great. Let's move to our next slide. Now, Stephen, I'm going to turn our focus now to a little bit of the legal nitty-gritty aspect. So I'll pass to you to work through and tell us a bit more about structure and how you see the preparation from a legal perspective.
Thanks, Kathryn. Yes, it's the legal slide, so I suppose I will step up. Look, establishing the conditions for success and growth early, and Gavin mentioned this, is very important. You need to be ready to go. That's in terms of your legal structure, your legal and tax positions, and your financial position. So you need to be having the right advice early and working to get yourself postured for that kind of acquisition. And of course, if you're an acquirer, for any potential acquirers listening today, that's the type of agency that is got everything in one sock, is what you would be looking to acquire. You should be starting your internal data room now and having that underway. And that data room is effectively all the documents that an acquirer would expect to find in a shared electronic data room to assist the process of due diligence. And if you can build that now, you will save yourself a lot of time when a knock comes at the door. Because it is a huge drain of resources trying to pull that together from scratch. But if you're building it as you go, it's very, very helpful. Making sure your internal and external stakeholder documentations are in order, and I'll speak about those in a moment. And your key partner conversations have occurred, and I think Rick was speaking about that. Everyone was being aligned and on the same page about what we were trying to do here. And then your 2IC stakeholder alignment, your second in command, key personnel in your agency who need to come into the tent on this and who will be looked at by a potential acquirer as the next you and what they're buying for the long term after you go off and make turn of gin, if that's what you're going to do. So in terms of the legal structure, and the slide there, there's many structures that your agency could have now. But what do acquirers look for? And my experience tells me that they really want to generally purchase a company, shares in a company, unless it's a sale of assets, and it's a different type of sale. But if you have a company or a trust arrangement, sometimes people have a partnership arrangement, which is the old traditional partnership model under the Partnership Acts of the various states and territories. You could have those structures, but generally, if there's going to be an acquisition of the entity, then they tend to want to purchase shares. And that may require an internal mergers and acquisitions process to happen with some pretty tough and pretty important tax advice in advance of the acquisition to posture yourself for takeover. Regardless of what structure you have now, you need to have that well-documented, good corporate governance and agreements in place that show how you are structured. In terms of the IP and data, and again, Gavin touched upon this, how important it was to identify the IP of your business, the brand of your business, and what it is, what assets you have to sell. Other than your client contracts and your staff, it's your IP and data that is becoming a very valuable asset, intangible asset of the business. So you want to, of course, ensure that your brand is being protected through trademarks. You've got your domain names and associated domain names buttoned down. You've got all the social handles that matter, and you have protections around your process and technology. This would involve registering trademarks, ensuring you've ring-fenced your copyright material and put copyright notices on things. You have IP asset registers in place. In terms of data and privacy, it's another whole area that could be spoken about, but having the collection, use and disclosure of personal information being done lawfully, having privacy policies and collection notices in place. And in terms of your data, whether that be personal information data or anonymized style data, whatever the data may be, having technologies, plans and protocols and agreements in place to protect that. So that's just an important piece there. In terms of the relationships, I mentioned stakeholder relationships. Internal stakeholders are ensuring your employment contracts are National Fair Work Act and National Employment Standard compliant. Making sure that you have proper independent contractor or freelancer agreements and that you're classifying these individuals correctly. I've seen deals almost come off the rails because an agency was paying people as independent freelancers when really the law considered them to be employees. And we're talking different rules applying for tax, superannuation, payroll, and insurance purposes there. You should have strong employment policies. These days, workplace health and safety and now COVID-safe policies are becoming very important, particularly as we all hope to get back to work after COVID Mark II. In external stakeholders, we're talking about client agreements. The number of agencies I've seen that live on handshake deals with their clients would surprise you. And agencies, when they're selling their goodwill, acquirers would like to see contracts, thank you very much, that show a good 2-3 years if that's the type of contract, or at least a strong contracting regime for a project by project based agency. The one thing that you need to be aware of is your change of control provisions in your contracts, if you have them, because you may need the permission of your client to sell your agency if you don't want the contract with the client terminated. So that's one critical piece of due diligence that may come out. Supplier agreements with your suppliers need to be buttoned down tight. And the one area I'll just call out there is IP. You want to make sure that you're acquiring the IP of things that they are creating for you so that you have chain of title to that. The other sort of related area is your subcontractors, where you as an agency, no one lives in a vacuum. There are subcontractors that help all of us provide our services to our end clients. And you need to ensure that there's harmony between the three contracts, the contracts between with you and your client and between you and your subcontractor. The three entities are in harmony so that, again, IP can pass through and critical obligations are able to be passed along and harmonised across those stakeholders. And more we're seeing things like social responsibility provisions. And I'm talking about modern slavery. I'm talking about probity, no bribery, anti-bribery, that sort of thing. And these are things that are what we call social responsibility provisions that are becoming very important, particularly to overseas acquirers. And insurance, making sure your insurance is in order. I think they're my points, Kathryn, on that.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm actually going to elaborate a little bit more on some of those. And as you all probably know me quite well, and from our last month's webinar with Sharon Turek and my lawyer colleague in Ohio, internal processes, which are hugely valuable to the acquiring party, or if you're buying, just the slick processes that you have that are specific to your agency, protecting those, giving them a name, and being able to value those and add that into the sale price as well. So I'm going to move to our financial aspect. And as Stephen said and Gavin said, Rick already a couple of years before, start now. You need to have all your ducks in a row and be prepared. Have everything starting to take shape in the right data rooms and vaults. You might not be selling next year or this year, but you'll be ready when that call comes or you decide to. So the key metrics, of course, they're going to be your P&L, your balance sheet, your intangible asset register, which Stephen mentioned and a particular topic of mine. Diversification, if there's something you've been talking about, make sure you clarify that with a visual. If you're a specialist agency as well, or even if you are a generalist but you have a specialist arm, have a visual representation of your brand architecture and what you offer, your service structure. The valuation methods, I'll come on to a couple of infographics that I've designed specific for today. Financials can be pretty dull and boring. Your monthly management meetings should always have these valuations calculating in the background, perhaps visualized on a dashboard, which I'll give you an example of how I like to do it. Your intangible assets as well, your brand and the technology and processes. It's always happening every month. Mention it, reference it in your management meetings. Have that valuation automatically calculating every time you lock down your budget for the month of July and today, 31st of August. For August. The relationships as well that Stephen touched on. Directors, be mindful of really important areas that, if you're running your own business, you've probably morphed into from the home hobby into a proper business, but you will probably all have Division 7A loans. Be mindful of those. You'll probably have a dividend policy. Make sure it's a policy. Have it stated. Leave entitlements, long service leave. These are really critical areas. These days, I see most businesses are calculating those as normal, as you are employees of the business, no matter the salary you take. But on an exit, you need to get paid out. So if you're not calculating those, and I only raise it because I've seen it happen a few times where the directors were not on the payroll. So make sure that you've got that all ticked off. I guess in that point as well about the drawings that you take out of the business and the Div 7A loans, just be mindful of how you're calculating that. And again, tax advice on this space. The team, again, this is a really valuable area for you. Are you selling your team? If you've got people on maternity leave, when they come back, what does it look like for them? Are they specialists? Are you wanting to make sure they're part of this deal? If so, because the acquirer wants them, because they are key to your business, then make sure you create that story that goes with the sale as to why they're critical. I'd also like to mention about the contracts that Stephen raised. I still find this as well. There are a lot of agencies that the contracts have expired and you haven't got the discipline internally to make sure they're formally renewed. Again, a third party can help you do that if you don't feel comfortable to do it directly with your clients. But I urge you to see this as just a normal professional way of running your agency. Similarly with the pipeline that you have, get some clarity around the campaigns that you have for your clients for the year. Even if they are project-based, predict what you think and have those conversations so it's a strong pipeline for selling across. The next slide, and I'm going to introduce Gavin and Rick to ask their advice or their thoughts on this area as well. What we're looking at here is just an infographic. Behind it is the hard data and just some examples of ways that I like to show the value of a business. And I guess, the first thing that we can point to is looking at the P&L. So over here, looking at your gross profit margins, net profit margins, Billings per head I've popped in there as well. If you're selling within the same sector, it's a relevant metric. And a lot of what I'm talking about now is assume you're buying an agency in the agency landscape. Assume you're being acquired by a fellow agency in the agency landscape. Assume you're in the agency and you're buying the agency from the owners or the founders. So these are just common metrics, and you can compare apples to apples in this sector. Again, really important, the services that you offer, the sectors you operate in, and the territory you operate in. It's just another way to discuss how powerful or strong your agency is if you have this diversity and you have this vision or this clarity around your offering. Some other really interesting factors would be the lifetime value of clients. So again, just putting some big figures, some long-term, I guess, relationships and some clarity here around it. And I'll jump down to the bottom here. This little table here is the list of services you offer and the clients that you have. And in the example here, I have the potential of what we haven't yet tapped on current clients. As an acquirer or as someone buying into a business, I can see a dollar figure associated with, if not accurate, although I would assume if you've got this level of financial acumen, you're pretty accurate on your sums here. But what's up for grabs for me? And maybe I'm selling the business because I can't actually, with the current team I've got, extract that or go after that. I simply don't have the resources to be able to do it. However, my acquiring party might. The acquiring party as well, when you're courting, might have a completely different service offering, which you could offer against your current clients. So again, kind of get into that space, get confident, and can create a compelling proposition. Graphs are always good, looking at payback periods, the revenue streams, how much is project-based, how much is retainer, do you have annuities? These are all really lovely dashboard values that give an acquiring party, or if you're buying in, clarity and confidence. And of course, your intellectual property as well, as Stephen mentioned. All of this is your stuff. It's your intellectual property created by you and your team, and you own it and you can sell it. Gavin, did you have anything you wanted to add here about I guess you mentioned it earlier, you did have your ducks in a row and you were able to show Wunderman Thompson what was up for grabs. Was there anything that you thought was an area you didn't have covered off, or that they really loved in particular, that you can share?
Yeah, for us, we did, the other thing that we modelled over a period of time was that we knew that the founders were not going to come forward with the business, and some of their costs were still within our profit and loss. So we modelled the shape of the business without the founders in the business, so it gave it a really accurate position of the future state. Yeah, profit, the margin would be enhanced moving into a merge situation in our particular case. And the other part was Wunderman Thompson was our priority choice because we believed that we strategically aligned with them, both geographically and from an offer perspective. We thought that we had something we could bring to the table, but we actually had 3 or 4 other options post that. So we looked at the shape of the financials and the matching of the service to their offer. So it was really clear what value we were bringing to the table for them, and then for other parties if that was required. So that's just part of the preparation. But I totally agree with you, is that to have everything modelled and mapped is the key to it. Makes for an easy conversation. And then also thinking about if you are approaching with a strategic proposition, having some thought to what the other partner might want from your business, apart from the financial impact.
Perfect. Rick, what about you? Because you would have seen a lot of the figures, I guess, in your positions with Kate. So did you find that easier then to have these conversations and doing the deal?
Yeah, you're right. We were privy to we directed all the numbers. And I think as part of that, we could see opportunities for expansion and growth. So I think leading up to the 18-month window, we'd experienced some significant growth in key areas, which we'd identified as further growth. I think when working through the numbers, just going back a couple of slides, and it was in relation to the data room and those sorts of things, we were coming from a demerger process, which there was lots of discussion around. We walked into it, we were under the impression there were things that were really critical from an IP perspective that we would absolutely require. But through discussion and negotiations, it really encouraged us to rethink about what we really needed and what was really important as part of that, knowing that there's a demerger going on and there's a price associated with all those things as well. So it really encouraged us to rethink what was part of that IP bucket, I guess.
Yeah, perfect. I'm just going to move to my next slide, which again is an infographic that kind of talks about the values. And it's a question that I asked on the way in, people registering for today's session, about multiples. And as I mentioned before, if you are selling and buying within the same sector, a multiple is quite typical. It's one of the three main, I guess, valuation models. And I kind of listed those at the top of the slide here. So the earnings multiple, price earnings ratio, and the future earnings. I actually believe you should be calculating all of these, and there may be some other metrics or evaluation calculations you'd like to include. If you set them up properly, and this is what I do with my agencies, in their monthly budget forecast management pack, they automatically calculate for you every time you load your latest results. So the earnings multiple from a 1 times could be your revenue, could be turnover, could be revenue, could be EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization. And it doesn't matter which, have them all calculate, because it depends on the circumstance. And we'll come on to this again, Stephen will agree also, every deal is different. So, the question that I saw quite a few times on the way into this webinar is it on EBITDA or is it on revenue? If your acquiring party is buying your team, it will be on EBITDA. If they're just buying your clients and they don't need all of your team, you could possibly look at revenue. But as I said, calculate all. A higher multiple means that you've got really low risk. The acquiring party has low risk on the data that you provided, the facts and figures and the forecasts. It means that you don't rely on a single client. You have a spread of client work. Means you're not relying on the business owner. Again, I saw that was a question on the way in from a lot of you. If you are the only person in the business or everything relies on you, start now to build up the second in charge, build up that middle management team. They're all capable. You just need the tools and the training, and I can help you with that. So talk to me later. Again, the low debt. So if you have loans post-COVID, have that managed, see that in the forecast as the payout, and maybe that helps you with your timeline as to when the right time is to sell, or you're just an asset sale, so you're not selling any of the debt. Again, the intangible assets components, so looking at these as potentially separate to that are assets of the business, but they could be bought separate. So if there were some aspects of the business that the acquirer didn't want, be discerning around what are these individual components worth, put a price on it. You can't be wrong, and it's all negotiable. Assumptions and your estimations, have your criteria, and then, as I said, just use a multiple of different calculations here, and then when you start negotiating, you'll have all your ducks in a row. Work in progress and accruals as well, be careful of those. I've worked with many agencies that have a WIP process, WIP and accruals. However, they tend to write off a large majority of the WIP on 30 June, end of financial year. So be serious about it. If that is going to be converted to actual billings and revenue, then I'd be happy to see that as stated value to the business. However, if there is a history, and I'd like to see that on the dashboard, of what percentage of write-offs happen, then show me. Tell me what it is, because it's maybe not all real money to me as the acquirer. So just be careful on that as well. All right, let's move on now to the negotiations. And I'm going to pass back to Stephen to take us a little bit through his the deal, the dance, and how you negotiate through the transaction. Stephen, over to you.
Thanks, Kathryn. So, ladies and gentlemen, the offer, transaction, and earnouts. Again, just going in a little bit deeper there. So, on the offer side, what deal is on the table, or what do you want to offer? And as already mentioned, we could be talking about a share sale arrangement. That could be the deal, or we could be talking about an asset sale arrangement. And Kathryn mentioned you can look at your assets in different ways and value them in different ways. It might be a unit sale if you have a unit structure, a trust structure. Generally, we see a share sale agreement with a share sale structure if it's not an asset sale. So, boldly speaking, it's either going to be some sort of unit or share sale, or it's going to be an asset style sale if that's what's going to happen. Then the next question is, well, are you going to sell 100% now, Or will you sell only a percentage of that now, whether it be a controlling percentage or a non-controlling percentage, with the acquirer obtaining more later or having an option agreement to do so? So these are things to think about. Generally, that'll involve, if there is a 100% sale or a partial sale and then an option sale, you will generally see some form of earn-out based on that, based on an upfront payment and then a performance-based multiple, and a multiple effectively enlarged by performance, and whether that be revenue or EBITDA or however that is worked out. So again, there is no template answer. It is what you're willing to offer or what an acquirer is willing to give, and meeting somewhere in the middle. But generally speaking, the type of documents that you would see coming out of that would be a share sale agreement or a unit sale agreement or an asset sale agreement. You may find you'll have some shareholder agreements that need to be signed if you're staying in the business as shareholders for a time. There may be option agreements, as I've mentioned, if it's only a partial sale at this stage. Generally, key staff or key personnel, including the partners or the initial shareholders, the selling shareholders, will be asked to sign strong executive service contracts if they're to stay. And there may even be special or separate non-compete agreements that the acquirer will ask you to sign. So that's kind of what could be an offer and the way the structure will look. And often that will be reflected in that big muscle move document, the letter of intent, the deal memo, the heads of agreement, whatever you want to call it. And that structure should be ironed out there, but it will be finessed as time goes on. In terms of the transactions, the leaders, who are the leaders? There should be really one party that leads the negotiation on behalf of the partners, if there are other partners there. That person will lead in and through the due diligence process, and the due diligence process is very important and can take time. And depending on the size of your agency, there will always generally be a legal due diligence and a financial due diligence. Obviously, Kathryn's assisted with the financial side many times. I've assisted with the legal side on both the acquiring and the selling side, purchasing side. And depending on your side, there might be an operational due diligence and a technology due diligence, depending on who it is and who you are. So that can take time. One of the key things that I like to suggest to agencies that are the target or are looking to sell is think about the reverse due diligence. Everyone's worried about getting due diligence performed on them, but who's buying you? Yes, they might be some big multinational company based in France or the UK or the US, but their company in Australia is a $2 company. Can they afford to pay the earnout? Are they going to be there for the long haul? So what's not surprising is we've been insisting on parent company guarantees, etc. So we want to see who's buying it. So reverse DD, even a light one, is important. In terms of the earnout side, what are your expectations? Again, if you're selling, as high a multiple as possible, based on earnings, performance, EBITDA, revenue, whatever the deal might be in. Some critical points there. Operating expenses. It's going to be in your interest as a seller to limit those operating expenses that will serve to reduce the earnings performance, however that's measured, what metric you use, and then attract the multiple. So the more expenses that you can take out of that, the better your outcome will be. And remember, for every dollar you spend in an expense in the business is a loss by 5 or by 7 or by 3 or whatever your multiple is if at the end of the day. So you really want to be limiting what those can be. Obviously, the acquirer will want to be maximising them. The other one is to ensure there's normalisations. You have a business that has been running very, very well. Obviously, you're attractive to an acquirer, but coming into a big organisation will add a huge cost to your agency. There'll be audit costs, there'll be compliance, there'll be governance, there'll be internal service provision costs, there'll be money that's taken from Australia to overseas holding companies through whatever mechanism they come up with. It'll increase the cost on the agency. But that's not fair to apply all those costs to the agency simply because now the acquirer wants that. So you'll have to normalise and remove things to ensure that it doesn't unfairly impact the earnout, if there is an earnout. Also, what we want to look for, particularly from a legal point of view, is if you're selling a majority stake in your business or you're selling 100% of the business, that during the course of any earnout phase, there are some fair minority protections for you as minority shareholders, and or you have some veto rights over certain decisions. Because if you sell the agency and then suddenly there's a dramatic change in the way the agency is operated, where the P&Ls are pushed together, it doesn't matter. They can significantly change your ability to earn out and maximise your earn out. So having some ability to say, no, we're not agreeing with you doing that is very, very important from the target or the seller side. No caps on, possibly no caps on the earn out amount. And I've seen some incredible outcomes for agencies that have sold, that had no caps, but everyone has benefited because the acquirer has benefited because the agency has boomed, but the sellers have done very well as well. But there was no cap on what they were able to earn in the final phases of the earnout. As I mentioned, force majeure, COVID, what we're all experiencing, it's a very difficult one. If you get caught up in something like COVID could you imagine if you were in a 4-year earnout or a 3-year earnout that started in 2019, you had a good year in 2019, you hit COVID in 20 and COVID Mark 2 in 21. What does that mean for your earnout? It's a real problem, which is why I've mentioned it's really important to be super happy with the upfront deal, because that'll insulate you against those types of things. But nowadays, I would be expecting to be inserting protections. And I like to think of a pause. If you have a 3-year earnout and you get hit with a COVID year and you're able to elect to pause and you pick up after the COVID ends, it's effectively pretending that year didn't happen and moving on. You could do it that way. There's a number of other mechanisms you can use, but these are things we need to think about in the world that's becoming more and more uncertain with all sorts of disasters that are hitting us. And, it may not be disease related next time. It might be geopolitical. Who knows? We just need to be prepared. Hopefully that's helpful, Kathryn.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. And for those like right now in COVID, if it is a bit of a blip on your financial, stunning results in 2018, 2019, do a trajectory of what would have happened if COVID did not happen. So you can certainly show what would have happened and grow from there. And maybe you do delay your exit on that basis, that you're just going to start getting organised. We've got a couple more slides now where we're going to share with you some tips and traps that all of us have experienced. And I suppose the one that comes to my mind, just to kick off, and then I'll pass over to Stephen, is in the due diligence, the DD process. And I really liked what you said before. Why don't we do some questions on the acquirer? It's like dating. The suitor is going to ask us lots of questions and want to look at all our figures. And if we are the ones selling and we've initiated it, I often find the agencies that are this type of person who's running it, agency head, has everything ready to go and they want to just hand it all over. You actually need to hold back a little bit, like in the courting process, and not give everything straight up. So there is definitely a slowly drip feed and an order and a process. And similarly, when you have an agreement, the heads of terms that Stephen mentioned, your for sale prospectus, however you want to call it, make sure you have that agreed, and even a deposit paid. So when does that happen? How much is that? Is it a non-refundable deposit? Are you allowed to talk to others? Is it exclusive? So probably these are my tips for thinking it through at the beginning and knowing your process that you're prepared to work through with the acquiring party. If they're a bigger agency, they're going to have a lot more experience than you. And certainly, Gavin mentioned it earlier as well, the Photon Group and WPP, it's not like they do this just once. They've done it many, many times. So for a lot of you attending today, it will be the first time for you. So I think that's where you surround yourself with people, the wise counsel that can guide you through what is the right process. So don't give too much away too soon. Stephen, what about you? What's on this approach of selling or acquiring? What would be your biggest tip you can give and a trap to watch out from?
Yes, well, look, I'll just grab a couple because obviously time, but you've only got one farm to sell. Sell it well. As Kathryn mentioned, the big group companies buy and sell agencies and divest all the time. So you've only got one farm to sell. An NDA, non-disclosure agreement, is an absolute must in the advanced stage, in the beginning stage, even before you get to term sheet or heads of agreement or letter of intent stage. It should be two-way because you will be asking questions of the acquirer, and that's one point. The other one on the trap side, the bottom one there is, I just mentioned, beware the recon mission. What do you mean by that, Stephen? Well, I have seen, believe it or not, a situation where the entire purpose of going into the NDA and the effectively a due diligence was just simply for them to do a competitor analysis of the client. And that's the only conclusion that we were able to reach. And, you know, not giving too much away, even when you are under an NDA, is important, because the best legal contracts and documents in the world are not as good as not saying something you shouldn't. So just bear that in mind. Only give away what you need to, and be aware that sometimes everyone is not what they may seem. And that's not always the case, but just be alive to it.
So I might flick to the next slide and then invite Gavin and Rick to contribute as well. So whilst doing the deal, negotiating and the documentation, even the approach, Gavin, do you have any learned wisdom tips that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, for me, I think the soft engagement is as important as the hard engagement. I think that you can, from a due diligence perspective, you need to think about life after the deal, and the finance can get in the way and blur what could potentially be the most dangerous part, which is, are we going to get on? Are we going to be able to run the business in the way that we have done so successfully for so long? So having conversations right at the front end about what life will be like and whether there is a great purpose and culture fit is just as important as the financials. And sometimes that can actually stop a process. That actually stopped our process when we were looking at an individual investor, is that lack of understanding of the industry and lack of understanding of how the business operated pushed us away from that particular style of deal. And I think that can save you a lot of heartache afterwards, because the cultural fit is the thing that will make the business continue to perform post. The other part is, I think that Stephen's absolutely right, is all the internal mechanics of the people that are buying you. You need to make sure that's not reflected. It needs to be, you need to be pushing them to the side for any of your earn-out. You need to be remunerated on what your business brings to the table.
Yeah, perfect. What about you, Rick? Anything to add?
Yeah, I'd echo Gavin's comments. Like, communication is absolutely everything throughout these, and just trying to take that higher ground throughout it. In our situation, we've got still an engaged previous owner who's a non-exec director, and there were certain instances throughout that became pointy and sharp and a little bit prickly. But throughout, we just kept, it was probably some of those softer engagements, Gavin, that you mentioned at the start, where we really tried to set our overarching intent, which we'd always try and continue to work together in a strong working relationship. And we've managed to navigate that, fortunately. But lots of communication. I think probably a watch out for us was, you mentioned it, Stephen, when you're dealing with advisors, just be really clear about roles, responsibilities, and who's driving these situations. Sometimes there was some ambiguity from our experience that led to some challenging conversations.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I'll just click to the next slide, which is our ducks in a row, and back to the clarity for yourself. If you own the business that you are selling, or if you're in the business that you are buying, be clear on your own agenda and your requirements from a legal perspective and a financial perspective, and certainly surround yourself with the counsel that you need. But at the end of the day, it's your gig. So yeah, nicely put.
And two very quick war story points, just to echo and wrap it up, Kathryn. I've seen where a deal has just taken so long to go from due diligence to transaction documents that the holding company overseas changed its perspective on what it wants to do with overseas acquisitions. And it wasn't, and the deal just stopped because it changed. Economic circumstances changed, priorities changed, and the deal stopped. So after all these months of negotiating, came to an end. Another situation that I was speaking about with a large holding company a couple of months ago, I was being told a story about how they found an agency they wanted to acquire in Sydney. It was the dream gig or the dream sale for the little agency, but the lawyer forced them through 9 versions of the NDA. And they couldn't even negotiate the NDA just to even start the process. And the holding company said, we can't deal with the agency, we can't deal with the lawyer. So don't let your advisors overcook the deal. That's all I'm trying to say. You've got to be commercial about it and get a deal done and pick your battles and watch out for cultural sensitivities, particularly when you're dealing with the French. There you go.
Fantastic. Well, look, we have come to the end of our session today, so I'm going to just wrap up with some final Q&As. I did receive some prior to today's session, but if any of you did have questions, please type them into your toolbar, the Q&A section at the bottom. But I'll wrap up by saying thank you once again to both of our guests today, Gavin and Rick, for joining us and sharing parts of your story and how you've negotiated this territory, this almost once in a lifetime for a lot of us. And Stephen, of course, thank you again for your wise counsel and your great experience that you have in this sector. If you do have any questions beyond today, please reach out to us and we'll be very happy to answer. Are there any final words to wrap up? Is it a good thing to buy into the business, Rick?
It's very exciting so far, and I couldn't imagine life without it currently. So I'm really excited to be where we are currently.
It's quite new for you. It's this year, isn't it?
Yeah, it happened at the end of June. So we're a couple of months in, so it's all still very exciting.
So the baton is still warm.
Yeah. We're still having lots of conversations with previous owners and things like that. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, great, newsworthy. And Gavin, I guess from your perspective as well, yourself, Martin, Mel, you're new in, and life for you three particularly has changed probably beyond what you might have originally expected to some really great opportunities, as I understand.
Yeah, we're really happy with where we've landed. I think strategically it's absolutely been the right thing to do. Everything that we wanted to achieve has been achieved. Wunderman Thompson have proven to be an amazing partner. Both Martin, Mel and myself have national leadership responsibilities. Cool. Martin has moved into in the CTO role nationally for Wunderman. And Mel is running all the partnerships for us nationally, and I work with the other managing directors to bring the consulting thinking to bear, which has been awesome. So, it's all green lights for us, which is great.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you all again, and thank you to our audience as well. We'll close the session now, and ask us questions later on if you have them. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.